I'm Karlyn Borysenko. I'm an analyst and independent journalist covering the far left in America. And last night I broke the news over on the Decode the Left Substack, which you can get to by going to Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. The link is right up there. I broke the news about the new manifesto that has just been released in the last month from a militant queer nihilist group that advances the message of be queer, do terrorism. Now, you can find the full manifesto over on my Substack. I break down every single page and tell you what I think the language in it means and what I think the most important pieces are. But just to give you a preview, here's the front cover of the actual physical paper copy of the manifesto. It says Queer Manifesto by Nihilistic Violent Extremists of Inome Press. So Inome Press is probably going to be some far-left radical revolutionary collective that produces materials like this. So that's going to be a source of additional information there. And on the back cover, it says, be gay, do terrorism. And then at the bottom, it's really hard to see, but you can see it says, well, you might not be able to see it, but it says, become nothing and do anything. The premise of this manifesto is about the complete abolition of identity, the complete abolition of gender. It also talks about the violent overthrow of society, embracing violence as part of a leftist political strategy. They talk about so many different crazy things in the covers of these pages. I highly recommend everyone check out the Substack, or you can find my full review and breakdown of the document on my YouTube and Rumble channels as well. But I want to point out one quick thing that is really important that people understand about far-left queer activism that's going to make a lot of aha moments go off as to what these people believe and what they want to do in the world. So this is just one example in this document where the people who wrote it go out of their way to enumerate the difference between trans and queer. And this is something a lot of people don't understand. Trans and queer are not the same thing. When we're talking about being trans, we're talking about someone who says, I want to go from being a man to a woman or a woman to a man. When you're talking about being queer, what queer people believe is that gender is not real. It is a social construct created by capitalism, and they want to abolish the idea of gender entirely. It is not enough to be able to change your gender. They don't view that as far left for them. They want to be able to abolish the concept of gender entirely. They want to abolish the category of men, and they want to abolish the category of women. This is why they teach kids about non-binary stuff in schools, or that gender is a spectrum. Drag Queen Story Hour is all about teaching kids that changing your gender is as easy as changing an outfit. They are trying to convince people that gender is not real. And this is a fundamental distinction, okay? Trans people want to uphold the categories of gender. You might not like that they want to switch between the two, and certainly there are criticisms to be made on that, but ultimately at the end of the day, people who are transitioning, that's what trans means in that context, transition, they want to uphold the categories of men and women. They just want to be able to switch between the two. Queer Marxists are fundamentally different in that they don't want people to be able to switch between the two categories because they don't think the two categories are real. They do not think they exist. They want to abolish all categories of gender. That's why they created the category of non-binary. Non-binary literally means no binary. When they say trans, they don't mean transition. They mean transform or transcend. So a trans person who believes in the gender binary, when they say trans, they mean transition, go between one and the other. When queer Marxists use the term trans, and I know this can be a bit confusing, they don't mean transition. They mean going beyond gender. Transforming gender, transcending gender, and all of that stuff. And you can see that reflected just on this one page in the document, although it does it several times. They say, trans represents progressive gender reform, whereas queer represents anarchic gender nihilism. Why is this important to understand? Because the problems of trans ideology, of which there are many with the medicalization of children, that is a huge problem. It is a fundamentally different problem, however, than queer ideology and queer gender nihilism, which is exactly the thing that produced this document. I know people might have misgivings about trans people, but right now, it is not actually the trans people who are mostly the problem. It is the militant, violent, queer extremists. Queer is not about being gay. Queer is not about being trans. In fact, many times throughout this document, they actually attack gay people. They basically call gay people straight. They say that gay people are not militant enough for them. They're trying to radicalize as many gay people as possible to make them queer. And so you do not need to be gay or trans in order to be queer. In fact, another thing this document does is they literally say anyone can choose to be queer and it's time everyone does. So it's very important people understand this. Queer is not a gender identity. Queer is not a sexuality. We have got to stop conflating the two, because the far left is not conflating the two. In fact, the far left is saying, you idiots, we are not the same thing. They're trying to give us their definition. It's just that people actually have to listen to what they're saying, okay? And so the reason that we care about this is that queer is a militant, violent, anti-assimilationist, anti-capitalist ideology that is now literally calling for terrorism. It is not trans people who are calling for terrorism. Many of the people who wrote this document and were involved in the distribution of this document are not trans. Some of them aren't even gay, because queer is a political ideology. It is not about your gender identity. It is not about who you love, who you're having sex with. It is not about what is the thing between your legs. It's not about that at all. It is about the complete abolition of gender, the complete abolition of all identity. They are teaching this to your kids in school right now. This might seem like a crazy thing, right? Karlyn, how are they going to abolish all gender? Well, they're already doing it, guys. They're already doing it. There are some school districts in this country where like upwards of 40% of kids, I've seen the polling, upwards of 40% of kids believe that gender is not real. The concept of gender not being real comes from these people, and these people are now overtly calling to do terrorism on behalf of queer identity and this queer ideology and all of that stuff. So it is critically important people start to understand the difference between trans and queer. You do not need to be trans to be queer. You do not need to be gay to be queer. You can be a straight white man and still be queer, because queer is a political ideology that wants to undo cultural norms. They call it normativity, in order to overthrow our entire way of life. They're trying to abolish gender. They're trying to abolish the nuclear family. They're trying to abolish all identity groups. And they're doing this socially by teaching this stuff in the schools. And now they're being explicit about their intention. It's all in this document. So head over to the Substack. Again, that is Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com, if you want to learn more about this. And certainly I'm going to be talking more about this. And this is going to be something that we reference back very often. And if you think there are people in your life that need to know this information, hey, please share it. It's all freely available, and I appreciate you sharing my work.